On the morning Ellen May Carter returned her dead father's tractor, half the county thought she had finally broken. She drove the machine herself straight through downtown Clay County just after 7 in the morning, less than 8 months after burying her father. And by the time she reached Hollis Equipment, 3 different people had already called Frank Hollis to warn him she was coming. That tractor had cost Sam Carter $185,000. Everybody knew the number because Sam had repeated it proudly for months. Biggest purchase he ever made. Said it was the machine that would carry the Carter farm into the next generation. Now his daughter was bringing it back after one harvest. Frank Hollis walked out of his office before Ellen even shut the engine down. "Tell me this ain't really happening," he said. Ellen climbed out of the cab without answering. She looked exhausted, not emotional, not angry, just tired in a way most people in town were too polite to admit they recognized. Frank lowered his voice. "Your daddy waited half a year for this tractor. My daddy also died owing money on it." Frank glanced around the lot immediately after she said that. 2 mechanics had already stopped working to listen. "Ellen, I read the loan papers," she said. "I know exactly what this thing costs every month." Frank tried one more time. "Your father believed this tractor was the future of that farm." Ellen looked him dead in the face. "That tractor is the reason there might not be a future." That line spread through Clay County faster than the weather report. By lunchtime, men at Miller's Diner were repeating it word for word between bites of eggs and sausage. Some called her ungrateful. Some called her stupid. Roy Donnelly called her dangerous. "That girl spent too much time in college," he said loudly from the counter stool near the coffee machine. Roy farmed over 2,000 acres and bought new equipment almost every season. "You start thinking like her, you'll be farming with horses again." A few men laughed, but not everybody did, because deep down, most of them knew something they never said out loud anymore. The equipment payments were getting harder to breathe around. Ellen did not hear any of this. She was at First Clay Bank watching the refund numbers appear on a desk calculator while a woman named Patricia Sloan avoided eye contact across from her. Patricia handled Sam Carter's operating loans for years. She used to smile every time Sam came in. She did not smile much anymore. After payoff and penalties, Patricia said carefully, "You'll clear $146,000. Ellen nodded once. "Apply $30,000 directly to the operating note." Patricia blinked. "You're paying that down?" "That's what I said. Most people will hold the cash." Ellen gave a dry little laugh at that. "Most people around here are drowning in machinery." Patricia stared at her for a second. Then she lowered her voice. "Your father never missed a payment." Ellen looked out the bank window before answering. "Yeah," she said quietly. "And it killed him." That was the part nobody in town wanted to talk about. Sam Carter did not die young because he drank too much or smoked too much or lived recklessly. He died tired. Tired of debt. Tired of weather. Tired of watching corn prices drop, while machinery prices doubled every few years. The year before he died, Ellen caught him sitting alone at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning staring at bills with his glasses off and one hand pressed against his chest. He told her it was indigestion. 2 months later, he collapsed beside the feed barn before sunrise. 59 years old, dead in the snow before the ambulance reached the farm. And now his daughter was doing the one thing he never would have done himself, admitting the numbers no longer worked. By late afternoon, Ellen's refund money was already moving out again. $10,000 for a 1974 International 1066 from an auction outside Columbia. $7,000 for an old John Deere 4440 from a retired farmer near St. Joseph. $4,000 for a worn but reliable grain truck. $12,000 toward old operating debt. Another $40,000 moved straight into savings. When Uncle Warren saw the list that evening, he thought she'd lost her mind all over again. "You returned a brand new tractor," he said, staring at the paper in disbelief, "to buy old junk?" Ellen sat across from him at the kitchen table where her father used to drink coffee every morning before daylight. "No," she said calmly. "I returned one payment." Warren shook his head slowly. "Your daddy worked 30 years to modernize this farm." Ellenish returned. "My daddy spent 30 years trying to keep up with people who were just as scared as he was." Warren leaned back hard in the chair. "You really believe all this?" Ellen looked toward the dark window over the sink. I found his ledger book. That changed the room immediately. Warren stopped talking. Sam Carter's ledger book was private. Always had been. Ellen stood up, walked to the counter, and brought back a worn black notebook with dirt still pressed into the cover. She opened it halfway and slid it across the table. Warren adjusted his glasses. For nearly a full minute, he said nothing. Then he quietly read one line out loud. If corn drops another 40 cents, we are in serious trouble. The room went still after that. Warren knew Sam's handwriting, knew exactly what he was looking at. When did he write this? He asked. 2 months before he died. Warren closed the book slowly. He never told me things were that bad. Ellen gave a 10-year shriek. Men like Dad don't say things like that out loud. Warren stared at her for a long time. And you think old tractors fix this? No, Ellen said. I think breathing room fixes it. Outside, cold November wind rattled against the side of the farmhouse. Somewhere down the highway, men were still laughing about Sam Carter's daughter returning his tractor. But none of them knew what Ellen knew yet. None of them had seen the numbers hidden inside that ledger. And none of them understood that before spring planting even arrived, half the farmers laughing at her were about to discover the same thing Sam Carter discovered too late. The newer their equipment got, the less of their farm they actually owned. Uncle Warren came over 3 nights after Ellen returned the tractor. He did not come to eat. He came because half the county thought Sam Carter's daughter had lost her mind, and part of him was starting to wonder the same thing. Ellen was sitting at the kitchen table with 2 notebooks open when he walked in. One belonged to her. The other belonged to her dead father. Warren looked at the empty space outside the window where the deer used to sit. Your daddy loved that tractor, he said immediately. Ellen didn't look up. My daddy also died owing money on it. Warren pulled out a chair hard enough to make it scrape across the floor. You really think returning it was the right thing? Ellen finally looked at him. I think keeping it would have buried this farm. That tractor was supposed to save this place. Ellen gave a tired little laugh. That's what scared him into buying it. Warren frowned. Your daddy wasn't scared. Ellen slid the black ledger book across the table toward him. Read it. Warren opened the book slowly. At first it looked like normal farm records. Seed costs, fuel, repairs, loan balances. Then he saw the notes written in the margins. If corn drops again this fall, we're in trouble. Another page. Can't sleep. Another. Need bigger yields, or I don't know how this works next year. Warren's face changed as he kept reading. Ellen watched him quietly. 3 weeks before he died, she said, he wrote that his chest had been hurting again. Warren closed the book halfway. He never told me any of this. Dad didn't tell anybody when he was scared. Warren sat there quiet for a long moment. Then finally, you really think that killed him? Ellen answered instantly. I think pressure did. That landed harder than Warren expected. Because deep down, he knew she wasn't wrong. Every farmer in Clay County was carrying more debt than they admitted out loud. Bigger tractors, bigger combines, bigger loans. Men spent their whole lives trying not to fall behind other men doing the exact same thing. Warren looked back down at the ledger. Your daddy wanted this farm modern. No, Ellen said quietly. He wanted it safe. She opened her own notebook and turned it toward him. This is what safe looks like. Warren frowned at the numbers. Old tractors, used planter, used grain truck, cash reserve, debt reduction. You're really going to farm 600 acres with old equipment? Ellen nodded. Paid for equipment. People are laughing at you. People around here owe the bank more than they own themselves. Warren leaned back slowly. Roy Donnelly says you're farming backwards. Ellen shrieked. Roy Donnelly refinanced machinery twice in 4 years. Warren looked at her carefully then. You've been planning this a while? Ellen hesitated, then nodded once. I just thought Dad would still be here when I did it. That was the line that finally changed the whole conversation. Warren stopped arguing after that, because suddenly this wasn't about tractors anymore. It was about a daughter trying to save the only thing her father left behind while carrying the guilt of undoing the thing he was proudest of. Warren looked toward the dark machine shed outside the window. You know what scares me? He said quietly. What? You might actually be right. Ellen looked back down at the ledger. Dad wasn't weak, she said softly. He just got trapped trying to keep up. Warren nodded slowly. Because every farmer he knew was trying to keep up with something now. Bigger farms, bigger payments, bigger risk. Nobody ever said enough. Before leaving, Warren stopped at the door. County's still going to think you betrayed him. Ellen sat silent a second before answering. Maybe. Then she looked back at her father's ledger. But I think losing the farm would have betrayed him worse. Spring came late that year, and by the second week of April, most of Clay County was already nervous. The ground stayed wet too long. Every few days another rain rolled through, just enough to keep fields soft and heavy. Farmers started gathering at Miller's Diner earlier than usual every morning, talking less about baseball and more about soil temperatures, planting windows, and weather forecasts. Roy Donnelly kept saying the same thing. One good dry week, and we'll be fine. But the dry week never came. Ellen spent most mornings underneath machinery instead of inside diners. Every tractor she bought needed something. Hydraulic hoses, bearings, wiring, fuel lines. She worked alone most of the time, sleeves rolled up, grease on her hands, her father's ledger sitting open nearby while she tracked every dollar she spent. By mid-April, people driving past the Carter farm still laughed at the equipment sitting in the yard. Roy called it the retirement home fleet. Somebody else called it museum farming. Ellen heard all of it. She just kept working. The first real problem hit on April 17th. The old planter she bought from Kansas City snapped a drive chain halfway through testing. Warren found her in the shed, sitting on an overturned bucket, staring at the broken assembly in silence. "How bad?" he asked. Ellen wiped her forehead with the back of her wrist. "Dealer says 4 days for the replacement part." Warren nodded slowly. "That's not good." No, it wasn't. Every day mattered now. If the fields dried before the planter was fixed, she'd lose valuable planting time. Warren watched her quietly for a moment. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Ellen already was. 40 minutes later, they were digging through a scrapyard behind an old repair shop outside town, looking for used parts. Warren finally found a matching chain assembly buried beneath rusted cultivator pieces and 2 cracked fuel tanks. Cost them $80 cash. Ellen had the planter running again before midnight. That was the first moment Warren started realizing something important. Ellen wasn't just trying to survive with old equipment. She understood it. Really understood it. Modern farmers replace parts. Ellen repaired systems. 2 days later, the fields finally started drying. And suddenly the entire county rushed at once. Huge tractors appeared everywhere. Planters moving day and night. Men trying to make up for lost time. That's when Roy Donnelly made his first mistake. His new articulated tractor weighed nearly 30,000 pounds with the planter attached. Too heavy for wet ground. Everybody knew it, but nobody wanted to wait anymore. Roy pushed into his south field anyway. By noon, he buried the rear axle halfway into soft soil. 3 different machines got stuck trying to pull him back out. Half the county drove by to watch. Ellen saw it while hauling seed home from town. Roy standing knee-deep in mud screaming at 2 hired men while his massive tractor sat tilted sideways like a sinking ship. Roy noticed her slowing down on the road and immediately looked embarrassed. Ellen just kept driving. She said nothing. By the next morning, Ellen started planting. Her tractors were older, smaller, lighter. The old International floated across the field without sinking. She planted slowly, but she planted. Row after row, hour after hour. While bigger operations waited for the ground to harden enough to support their equipment, Ellen kept moving. That got people's attention fast. 3 days later, old Walter Griggs stopped his truck beside her field while she was refilling seed. "You're ahead of half the county," he said. Ellen shrieked. "Ground's holding okay." Walter looked out over the rows. "Your daddy would hate admitting this." Ellen schmirked faintly. "Yeah." Walter nodded once. But he'd notice it. That mattered more to her than compliments ever did. By early May, most of her corn was already in the ground. Roy Donnelly was still finishing his western acreage after losing nearly a week dealing with mud damage and equipment delays. The jokes around town got quieter after that. Not gone, just quieter. Then came the heat. June hit hard and early. 98 degrees before summer officially started. then over 100. Day after day. The first breakdown started during the second week of July. Not Ellen's. Everybody else's. Modern tractors all over Clay County started throwing electronic faults in the heat. Sensors, wiring harnesses, computer shutdowns. One machine outside, Fulton, locked completely while planting nitrogen because a temperature sensor malfunctioned. Another refused to start after an onboard computer failed. Frank Hollis's repair trucks were suddenly running nonstop. Farmers waited days for diagnostics. Ellen watched it happen from the outside at first. Then one afternoon, Roy Donnelly himself pulled into her driveway. Ellen nearly laughed seeing him there. Roy stepped out sweating through his shirt. "You know anybody around here got a hydraulic fitting for a Case Magnum?" Ellen leaned against the shed doorway. Thought old equipment was for broke idiots. Roy ignored that. Dealers backed up 3 days. Ellen stared at him a moment, then walked into the shed and came back holding a dusty parts catalog. "Try Miller Tractor Salvage outside Boonville." Roy looked surprised. "You know where to find parts for that thing?" Ellen shrieked. "Machines are machines." Roy looked uncomfortable standing there. Finally he muttered, "Appreciate it," then drove off without another word. Warren watched the whole thing happen from the yard. That man's never thanked anybody in his life. Ellen schmirket. Heat makes people humble. But she wasn't celebrating yet, because her own problems were coming. Late July brought weeds. Fast, thick, aggressive. Some neighboring farms fell behind because their sprayers and cultivators sat waiting on repairs. Ellen's old tractors kept running, but now she had to work nearly non-stop to stay ahead. 14-hour days became normal. She cultivated fields under floodlights some nights just to keep pace. One evening around 10, Warren found her asleep in the tractor seat at the edge of the field with the engine idling. He climbed up and shut the machine off. Ellen woke immediately. "What time is it?" "Time for you to stop before you kill yourself." Ellen rubbed her eyes hard. "Still got 20 acres left." Warren looked at her carefully. Dirt on her face. Exhaustion in her eyes. "You're starting to look like Sam." That hit harder than he intended. Ellen looked away immediately. Warren softened his voice. "I didn't mean, no," she interrupted quietly. "You're right." She climbed down from the tractor and stared across the field for a long moment. "Difference is, I'm tired from work." Warren waited. Ellen looked back at the machine behind her. Not from fear. That was the first night she slept 6 straight hours in months. August brought another problem. A bad one. A violent thunderstorm ripped through the county and knocked power out almost everywhere west of town. Grain bins lost ventilation. Fuel pumps stopped working. Several newer tractors with electronic ignition systems failed after voltage surges during restart attempts. Frank Hollis's service department got overwhelmed again. Ellen spent the next 2 days helping neighbors pull grain manually and restart older equipment. Why? Because her tractors barely cared about electricity. Batteries. Starter. Fuel. Done. Simpler systems. Fewer failure points. The irony wasn't lost on anybody anymore. Men who mocked her old machinery in April were now borrowing tools from her by August. But the real test came during harvest. September stayed wet. October got worse. Rain delayed everybody. Then temperatures dropped fast. Suddenly the county was staring at the possibility of early frost damage if crops stayed in too long. That changed the mood everywhere. Men stopped joking completely after that. Now everybody was racing weather. Roy Donnelly's massive combine broke down on October 12th. Sensor failure again. Dealer estimated 2 days. It became 5. Roy nearly lost his mind. Ellen heard he screamed at a mechanic in the dealership parking lot bad enough to make one employee quit on the spot. Meanwhile, Ellen kept harvesting. Her combine wasn't pretty. 20-year-old machine. Loud cab. Manual controls. But it ran. Every day. She harvested corn, while bigger operations sat waiting for repair trucks. She fixed her own unloading auger with salvage steel after midnight one evening because she refused to stop moving. Warren found her welding in the dark around 1:30 in the morning. "You realize normal people sleep?" Ellen kept welding. Normal people also owe 6 figures on broken combines. Warren laughed harder than he had since Sam died. Then came the final week of October. Forecast called for freezing rain, followed by hard frost. Anybody with crops still standing after that would lose serious money. The entire county went into panic mode. Combines ran around the clock. Grain lines backed up for miles at elevators. Tempers exploded everywhere. And right in the middle of it, Ellen's grain truck blew a rear tire 15 miles from the farm, fully loaded. She pulled onto the shoulder and just sat there gripping the steering wheel for nearly 30 seconds. Not crying, not panicking, just exhausted. Because this was the exact moment everybody in town expected her little operation to finally collapse. No spare truck nearby. Elevator closing in less than 2 hours. Rain moving in overnight. She climbed out, kicked the ruined tire once, then walked to the toolbox and started changing it herself on the side of the highway under passing headlights. 40 minutes later, Warren arrived after hearing her on the radio. "You could have waited for help," he said. Ellen tightened the final lug nut. Couldn't afford to. They got the truck moving again with 20 minutes to spare before the elevator shut down. Ellen delivered the load covered in mud, grease, and freezing rainwater. The elevator manager looked at her paperwork and blinked twice. "You're almost finished." Ellen nodded tiredly. "Another day, maybe." The manager leaned back in his chair slowly. "Half the county ain't even close." Ellen didn't answer. She was too tired to enjoy it yet. 3 days later, she finished harvest completely. Roy Donnelly still had nearly 400 acres standing. Frost hit that night. By the end of the week, losses across the county were brutal. Lower quality, lower prices, damaged yields. Roy alone reportedly lost over $100,000 waiting on delayed repairs and weather windows. Ellen sat at her kitchen table the following Sunday evening staring at final numbers spread across her notebook. Warren sat across from her drinking coffee quietly. "Well," he asked finally. Ellen looked down at the page one more time before answering. "We made money." Warren leaned forward. "Real money." Ellen nodded slowly. "More than Dad made the last 3 years combined." Warren stared at her. "Jesus." Ellen kept reading the numbers almost like she didn't trust them herself. Lower fuel costs, lower repair debt, no major payments, better harvest timing, better crop quality. Everything added together into one truth nobody in Clay County expected. The farm had survived. Not barely. Cleanly. Warren leaned back in the chair and shook his head slowly. "You know what's funny?" Ellen looked up. "Roy Donnelly still thinks you got lucky." Ellen gave the smallest smile of the entire season. Good. Means he still doesn't understand what actually happened. And that was true, because most people in Clay County still believed Ellen survived because of weather or timing or stubbornness. They did not yet understand the bigger thing she had discovered. The less money she owed, the fewer things could actually kill her. The thing that bothered Clay County most was that Ellen Carter kept surviving. 1 good season could be luck. 2 made people uncomfortable. 3 made people start asking questions they didn't want answers to. By the 3rd year, the jokes about her junkyard tractors mostly disappeared from Miller's Diner. Not because people suddenly respected old machinery. Because too many expensive machines around the county kept breaking while Ellen's farm kept making money. Corn prices dropped hard in 1999. Panic spread fast. Farmers started borrowing against land just to cover operating costs. Roy Donnelly doubled down instead. Bigger planter, bigger acreage, bigger debt. Ellen did the opposite. She cut costs immediately, reduced fertilizer on weak-performing fields, delayed non-essential upgrades, shifted acreage into soybeans after spending 2 nights running profit projections at her kitchen table. Warren watched her covering pages with numbers and finally asked, "You ever stop thinking about this place?" Ellen shook her head. Not when mistakes cost this much. Most farmers around her reacted emotionally when markets got ugly. Ellen reacted matematically. That difference started separating her from everybody else. Then came the gray leaf spot outbreak. Most farmers ignored the early warnings. Ellen didn't. She remembered university research showing disease spread faster in continuous corn systems. So she rotated crops earlier than everybody else. Roy laughed when he heard she planted oats across part of her acreage. "What's next?" he joked at the diner. You bringing back horses too? Ellen ignored him. By harvest, disease damage hit nearly the whole county. Some farms lost huge portions of yield. Roy got hit especially hard because he pushed corn on the same ground too aggressively. Ellen's fields held steady. Suddenly, people stopped laughing about crop rotation. Farmers started showing up at her place quietly after dark, asking questions. Not publicly. Pride still mattered too much for that. But privately? Different story. How'd you know the disease was coming? One farmer asked. Ellen shrieked. I read. That embarrassed more people than she realized. Because most of them stopped studying farming years ago. They just kept buying newer equipment, hoping horsepower would solve problems knowledge used to solve. Ellen's real advantage wasn't the old tractors. It was that she understood both farming and economics. She knew exactly how much pressure debt created when weather turned bad. And weather always turned bad eventually. In 2003, flooding destroyed planting schedules across the county. Some farmers panicked and mud crops in a bad ground, trying to stay on schedule. Ellen didn't. She replanned everything field by field instead. Changed maturity groups. Shifted acres. Adjusted risk. Warren watched her redraw maps at the kitchen table 3 nights straight. You think like a banker, he told her once. Ellen shook her head. No, bankers think short-term. I'm trying to survive 10 bad years. Then drought hit in August. That's when most farmers really lost money. They started throwing expensive products at dying crops, hoping to save yields. More fertilizer, more spraying, more debt. Ellen refused. You can't buy rain, she told Warren. Instead, she focused on limiting losses and protecting soil moisture. Her yields still dropped. Everybody's did. But while neighbors were borrowing more money to survive, Ellen still had cash reserves sitting untouched. That changed everything. One by one, farms around Clay County started selling acreage. Auction signs became normal. New tractors with low hours started appearing at liquidation sales because owners couldn't keep up with payments anymore. Ellen attended almost every auction, not to buy machinery, to study mistakes. She looked at loan histories, acreage expansions, payment schedules. Warren once asked why she cared so much. Ellen answered simply, because this is what happens when people confuse growth with safety. Then came the moment that changed how the county saw her completely. Roy Donnelly's operation nearly collapsed during harvest after 2 major breakdowns hit at the same time. One combined failed. Then a grain car tractor went down 3 days later. Dealer wait times backed up almost a week because repair crews were overwhelmed countywide. Roy started losing crops fast. Everybody knew it. One evening, Roy showed up at Ellen's farm looking exhausted. Not arrogant, not loud, just tired. You still got that old 4440 running? He asked quietly. Ellen nodded. Roy looked embarrassed, even standing there. I need help pulling grain carts tomorrow. Warren almost laughed hearing that. 6 years earlier, Roy called her operation a scrapyard. Now he was asking to borrow one of her tractors. Ellen didn't make a big deal out of it. Be here at 6, she said. Roy worked beside her equipment for 4 straight days that harvest. By the end of it, he finally said the thing nobody expected. I think we made farming too complicated. Ellen looked over at him from the combine ladder. No, she said. You made survival too expensive. Roy didn't answer because deep down he knew she was right. By 2005, Ellen bought her first additional acreage since Sam Carter died. 80 acres beside her north field. Paid entirely in cash. That shocked the county more than any tractor she ever returned. Because most farmers around her age were drowning in operating loans while Ellen was buying land outright. Frank Hollis drove out to see her after hearing the news. He stood in the machine shed looking around at the same old tractor still running. You know what's funny? He said. Half the young farmers around here ask more about your operation than anybody else's now. Ellen schmierked faintly. Why? Frank gave a tired laugh. Because they're starting to realize you are one of the only people around here who actually owns their farm anymore. That was the thing Clay County finally learned the hard way. Ellen Carter never won because old tractors were magical. She won because when everybody else used debt to buy bigger lives, she used discipline to buy control. By the time 10 years passed, people in Clay County stopped talking about Ellen Carter like she was some stubborn farm girl who got lucky. Now they talked about her like somebody who saw the problem before everybody else did. Young farmers started showing up at her place, asking questions. Not about horsepower, about survival, about debt, about how she stayed profitable during bad years while bigger farms kept struggling. Ellen never tried acting like some expert. She simply opened the books and showed them the numbers. Machinery costs, interest payments, repair logs, yield reports. Most of them looked shocked seeing how little debt she carried. One young farmer told her, "You're the first person who made farming sound possible without drowning." That stuck with her. Frank Hollis eventually came back to the farm one afternoon and admitted something Ellen never expected to hear. "I owe you an apology," he said, standing inside the machine shed. "The day you brought your daddy's tractor back, I thought you were destroying this farm." He looked around at the old tractors still running and the land that now fully belonged to her. "Turns out you were saving it." Ellen didn't say much after that. She just nodded, because part of her had waited years to hear somebody finally say it out loud. Even Roy Donnelly changed over time. He started downsizing equipment, buying more used machinery, borrowing less. One morning at Miller's Diner, somebody joked about Roy driving an older grain truck now. Roy pointed across the diner toward Ellen and said, "Blame her. She made me realize I was working for the bank more than myself." The whole diner laughed, but nobody disagreed. Eventually, Ellen got invited to speak at a farming conference in Columbia. The room was packed with young farmers, lenders, and equipment dealers. Most expected her to talk about old tractors. Instead, she stood at the podium and said something simpler. This was never about old equipment. The room went quiet immediately. Ellen looked around before continuing. It was about freedom. "My father spent years terrified of falling behind. Bigger machinery, bigger payments, bigger risk. Everybody around him was doing the same thing. And somewhere along the way, people stopped asking whether they actually owned their farms anymore." Nobody moved in that room after she said that. Ellen continued calmly. "I'm not against technology. I'm against fear disguised as progress." After the speech ended, several younger farmers waited nearly an hour just to talk to her. One of them finally asked the question people had wondered for years. "Do you regret returning your father's tractor?" Ellen thought about it for a second before answering. "For a long time, I thought I betrayed him." She paused. "Now I think losing the farm would have betrayed him more." That line spread all over Missouri farm circles. But the biggest change happened inside Ellen herself. Over time, the guilt faded. The farm was stable. The land stayed in the family. The debt was nearly gone. And for the first time since she was a little girl, the Carter farm no longer felt scared all the time. One evening, Uncle Warren sat with her outside the machine shed, watching the sun go down over the fields. "You know," he said quietly, "your daddy probably would have fought you on every bit of this." Ellen laughed swiftly. "Oh, absolutely." Warren nodded, but I think eventually he would have understood. Ellen looked out across the field for a long moment after that. The same land her father nearly lost trying to protect. The same land people thought she would lose without modern machinery. It was still there. So was she. People always said Ellen Carter returned her father's tractor and bought old machines instead. But that was never really the important part. What Ellen actually bought was freedom. Freedom from panic. Freedom from debt controlling every decision. Freedom to survive bad seasons without begging a bank for more time. And in the end, that turned out to be worth a lot more than $185,000.